since the early 1970s, there's been a decline of real wages and a slowdown of growth. And that's not just in the United States, it's throughout the industrial world. And it has very big causes. I mean, too complicated to talk about now, but there's big structural reasons for that. Maybe mention it. But anyhow, it's been happening. Now, in the 80s, it intensified. It's policy run, it's policy driven. You know, it's not happening by laws of nature. The policies of the 1980s, particularly in Reaganite America and in Thatcher England, they were the most extreme, they accelerated. So there's a big, I mean, England is now back to the degree of inequality they had about a century ago. And the United States is, the inequality measures are one measure you can use of, you know, what's happening in a society. They were improving up until about the 60s in the United States, then they kind of leveled off and they got way worse in the 1980s in every respect. I mean, child malnutrition, you know, income, whatever you measure. How was this done? Partly by keeping the facts. I mean, people knew what was happening in their own lives, you know, like everybody knows what's happening to me, but it's very hard to find out what's happening everywhere. And in fact, the picture was that it was a period of great growth and prosperity, and Tom Wolfe called it one of the great golden ages in human history or something. And there was there was indeed a veneer of prosperity, and for some people, probably people in my income bracket, it was great. You know, gained a lot of money. In fact, there was some income growth. About 50% of it or more went to the top 1%, about 70% of it went to the top 0.5%, and the bottom 60% actually declined. So you get huge differentiations, but people only knew what was happening to themselves. You know, they didn't see it on television. You know, they didn't, I mean, finally it actually broke through. So, you know, there were some even popular books about it and so on. But the general picture of what's happening has certainly not been explained. I mean, you can see that South Central Los Angeles is exploding. Can't keep that quiet. But try to find an analysis of why it's true. I mean, there's some reasons why it's true. You know, take away the jobs, you send them overseas to places where you can really screw the workers properly, and people who are left in South Central Los Angeles are going to starve. You know, not a profound point. And that's happening all over the country. It's called the internationalization of production, for example. And it's supposed to be a good thing. You know, we're all told about how it contributes to economic efficiency and it's rational, and some economist lectures you about free trade and so on and so forth. That's the story here. What's actually happening, people know from their lives. And in fact, if you look at, but they don't understand the picture because that requires putting it together, you know. If you take a look at public opinion studies, you can see the way people feel about it. So for example, about 75% of the population thinks that life is going to be worse in the next generation than it is today. Now that's a real turning point in the history of industrial society. That's never been true. I mean, even at the depths of the Depression, which is way worse than anything now, there was a lot of hopefulness. You know, people felt it's going to get better somehow. You know, I can't remember that very well myself. But now people don't think so. Young people, for example, think they're not going to live as well as their parents. They may well be right, but that aspiration, that sense is very widespread. When polls ask people what they think about the economy, an astonishing figure, last ones I saw were over 80%, say that the economy is inherently unfair, meaning requires radical change. As for the political system, about half the population thinks both political parties ought to be disbanded because they're totally useless, they don't do anything. So you have a tremendous amount of disaffection. It goes on and on like this. And people just feel individually that things are not going right. But you are not going to find in the mainstream establishment literature much of an analysis of why or even that it is happening. And I think the basic propaganda method has been to focus, basically to distract people. So you watch, you know, sitcoms on television, or you know, look at National League football or something. Do anything except pay attention to what's happening to you. And there's a strong effort to get people isolated. As you've been seeing over the tube lately, there's billions of dollars being poured into the information, big information revolution, which is going to give everybody, 500 channels, which will all have the same garbage because they'll all be owned by the same people. But there'll be 500 of them now, so you'll really be stuck alone in your living room, twiddling channels, trying to find something to do, and not talking to the guy next door with whom you might get together and maybe change things. Well, that's a technique of propaganda, and an effective one. All of these things are very effective techniques. I mean, what I've been talking about is indoctrination, but that's mostly aimed at elites. That's like treetops propaganda. At the general public, propaganda is generally distraction. It's just keep the meddlesome outsiders busy with something else, whether it's sex or violence or gossip or sports or whatever. Just keep them there, then they won't be any trouble. And give them a picture of a kind of a glitzy world, That's, I think, the way most of the public relations system works.